Hi there, Brianna. I'm not sure I've lost communication with you, but I'm just going to start talking because it's very difficult, the communication here right now on the ground here in Bucha. So essentially, what we're seeing here, what you have behind me here is a mass grave. This is the place that you were just showing on those satellite images. And that's where the people here tell us that around 150 bodies have been buried here. It's also a place that we visited yesterday. It's an awful site. We're not going to come any closer to it because obviously we want to be respectful of it. But it's essentially two sand berms that you can see there. The actual mass grave is behind both of these sand berms, and there are literally dozens of bodies at the top of that.
Obviously, the communications there are difficult, but I want people to pause for a moment and let it sink in what Fred said there at the very beginning of that conversation. Fred Pleitgen in Bucha says, "What you have behind me is a mass grave." Those are chilling words in and of themselves. Fred suggesting or saying that 150, up to 150 bodies are in there. Bucha, this city northwest of Kyiv, where the Russians were in control for a month, for 5 weeks before being pushed out by this Ukrainian counteroffensive. The Ukrainians retreating north there, and now the Ukrainian forces back in control, discovering horror when they're back there, Brianna.
Yeah, and we also had heard earlier from the mayor, he thought that maybe as many as 290 bodies were there, but he also told us that half of them had been identified, which certainly would be close to 150. So we're going to get more information on those numbers, of course. But that is so many lives. And this is what folks have actually, you know what? I think we have Fred Pleitgen back. Let's try to get him in Bucha. Fred?
Hi there, Brianna. Yeah, we're really sorry about this because we're obviously there's big problems with communications here. The satellite phone networks are still down. The regular networks are down. So we're sort of on a satellite dish, a small one that we've set up here. But let me just set the scene again. Obviously, behind me you have the mass grave here in Bucha. It's right behind the main church. And what the people here have been telling us is they've been starting to fill this grave basically shortly after the Russians entered this place because so many civilians were getting killed in the process. And, behind me, the authorities say that there's around 150 to maybe 200 bodies inside that mass grave already. The mayor has said that he believes that in total here in this district, around 300 people might be buried in mass graves. But this is certainly one of the main ones. We just had some Ukrainian troops who came through here as well. Obviously, everybody who comes here is deeply saddened and angered by what they see. And the bodies that are inside that mass grave, all of them have been placed into plastic bags. Some of them are, however, still have sort of limbs that are coming out of the top layer of soil. And there's sort of several layers of dead bodies that are buried here. And unfortunately, the people that we speak to on the ground, we spoke to some of the emergency services guys, and they told us this is not the end of it. They are still finding bodies, not so much anymore in the streets. However, a lot of bodies inside houses, a lot inside cellars, people who took cover, some who were killed in other ways. So this is certainly something that no one here really believes is going to end anytime soon. The fact that they are finding dead people in Bucha all over the place. On the way here, we stopped an ambulance, we stopped an emergency services worker, and he told us that him and his crew and the other crews that were picking up these dead bodies collected more than 480 in the last sort of hours, in the last overnight hours alone. So certainly you can see right now, as the Ukrainian forces have moved in here, as they've taken control here, that's where we're seeing the full picture, or starting to see the full picture, of how many civilians were actually killed. And Bucha is one of those places where, of course, we know that there was that very heavy fighting going on. There's also still a lot of destroyed Russian armor that's in the streets here. There's much more Russian armor that was destroyed than many people would think. And also then the Russians, of course, are letting on. They're, of course, saying that this was a retreat that they had said was going to happen any time. They said it was orderly. When you're on the ground here, it certainly does not look orderly at all. a lot of Russian stuff is destroyed, and a lot of Russian uniforms are laying next to destroyed vehicles because the Ukrainians say some of these Russian troops, they went out so fast, they ditched their uniforms and simply ran away. So it is an absolutely devastating picture here in this district of Bucha, just outside of Kiev. And as you can see behind me, that mass grave, there still are a lot of people who are coming here. There's also people looking for loved ones. We saw someone just break down and cry because he believed that his brother was now buried here, whom he'd been looking for a very long time. This is definitely something that is, obviously hurting the people here of Ukraine as more and more focus is now coming here on this district of Bucha, Brianna.
It should hurt the soul of humanity, Fred. And it's very important to have you there at this exact moment. You are bearing witness to history, a tragic history. And if the signal's still up and if you can still hear me, Fred, what have you heard in terms of how or when these people were killed? All right, Fred isn't hearing us there. But again, I just want it to sink in what Fred was talking about there. Fred tells us they're finding bodies all over the place in Bucha. We've had different estimates of how many dead, anywhere from 150. Brianna, you heard from the mayor, over 200. Fred said he heard from someone who was searching for the bodies at over 400 at this point. We may never get an exact count, but when you see the scenes behind Fred, when you see people searching for their loved ones in that ditch, one death is a tragedy, a horror, an atrocity. We're going to try to establish contact with Fred again there because what he is seeing is so very important. In the meantime, let's go to CNN's Christiana Amanpour, who's in Kharkiv, who is in northeastern Ukraine, a place we haven't had any visibility with our reporters in some time. Christian, just tell us what you're seeing there.
Well, John, you can imagine that the people here in Ukraine's second largest city are really, really terrified of anything like what we've been seeing around Kyiv happening here as the Russian forces redirect to this part of the country. We have heard in the last 24, 36 hours that we've been here constant and regular artillery. We can hear the bombardments. We saw this morning the result of just one mortar that fell in a residential complex. And in that neighborhood, we're told there were 34 casualties, including 7 deaths. And that's just yesterday. Why am I here right now? I'm here in the metro in central Kharkiv, because even now, 40 days into this war, metro stations like this are absolutely packed with people.
That's the scene. Look at that.
Okay, obviously communication is an issue all over Ukraine there. Christiana Amanpour in a metro station in Kharkiv where people are still sheltering. Images like the London Blitz from World War II, people hiding in the tube station there. I think we have Fred Pleitgen back. We're going to ping pong as much as we can because having the reporters here is so essential. Fred, we were talking to you before, trying to get a sense of what you're hearing about how and when these civilians have been killed over the last 5 weeks in Bucha.
Yeah, and again, we have to apologize to our viewers. We're having real trouble keeping this communication upright, but we keep trying to come back up every time, that it goes down. And it's a really interesting question, and one that we also asked as well. And this grave here has been filled, throughout the time that the Russians occupied this place. They said that they started opening it and started burying people here shortly after the Russians invaded this area because there were so many civilian casualties on the ground, people who were getting shot in the streets, people who were, in the crossfire of fighting as well. But generally, a lot of people who were getting killed as the Russian forces rolled in here and then occupied this place. So it was really at the beginning of March, in the early stages of March, first week of March. I'm going to get out of your way a little bit. You can see there's more Ukrainian soldiers who are obviously coming here as well. They fought for this place for such a very long time. And now for them, it's also, of course, devastating to see what happened to their compatriots during the time that this place was under Russian occupation. You have the 2 crosses back there. I think that's sort of where the mass grave started when it was when they opened it for the first time about a month ago. And they essentially told us that they simply didn't have the time and the place to be able to bury people properly. And so they opened it fairly shortly after the Russians came in here, and then it just kept filling up as more and more people were getting killed. And of course, one of the other things that you have to imagine is that, you know, this place was under Russian occupation, but there was fighting going on. So it was extremely dangerous also for people to try and pick up some of the bodies and bring them here for burial. At the same time, of course, there were the occupying forces who made it difficult for people to move around the streets. And so by and by, they say this grave kept filling up. But now, of course, especially in the past couple of days, there were a lot more bodies that have come in here as the situation has become more safe on the streets, because obviously the Russians are gone. But at the same time, they're finding a lot of these bodies now on the streets here and sort of bringing them away. So it's something that's been going on for a very long time. You know, we saw those satellite images that at various stages showed this this grave evolving, if you will, as this place was under control of the Russians, and now obviously people here are finding the full extent of how many bodies are actually buried here. But I think one thing that we have to point out, John, is that everything that we hear about this place is that it's only estimations. People do not know how many folks are actually buried here, how many bodies are actually buried here. They think it's about 150, maybe a little more, maybe around 200, but they simply don't know because so many people were killed, and it was such a difficult situation that pretty much people lost track of how many were actually being buried here. And again, this is something that is still going on in this district of Bucha because they're still finding so many bodies. It's an absolutely unclear situation how many civilians were actually killed here, but they can say it was many, considering the fact that they just picked up more than 400 dead bodies here off the streets, in cellars, in destroyed buildings just overnight, John.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly horrific. And that is what so many people are dealing with. Their loved ones who were left behind in Bucha or who tried to stay. And now they don't even know necessarily what happened to them. They're wondering if they are in that mass grave behind you. So much unclear, except what is very clear is just how terrible this is that has happened there in Bucha, Fred. If you could stand by for us, I do want to go back to Kharkiv, which is where we find Christian Amanpour. Christian, we lost you just momentarily there before, but could you set the scene for where you are for us? All right, unfortunately, we have lost Christian there again. I do, though, want to talk about a very important interview that we did, which is with the mayor of Bucha, where Fred just was reporting from, where that mass grave has been discovered, where bodies were strewn across the central road there. And so many dead Ukrainians have been found in people's backyards, in their cellars, as he said. The mayor said, "We will not forgive the Russian people for the atrocities that happened." That is what he's saying after Russian troops left this trail of horror in the streets of his city. And he says that he got the impression that Vladimir Putin gave his troops the green light to go on a safari, as he put it, in Ukraine. Mayor, can you please tell us what you're seeing in Bucha?
Yes, I can tell you. At the moment, there is half the city is destroyed. There is a lot of destroyed buildings, a lot of dead bodies on the streets, and the services are working on clearing mines, transitioning from war footing to peacetime living, and within the confines of the martial law that we have. We get the impression that the Russian occupiers have got the green light from Putin and Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, to have a safari in Ukraine, and they weren't able to take Kiev, so they vented their frustration on Bucha and the surrounding areas.
Mayor, have you been able to identify any of the bodies in the mass grave or on the street there where we have seen the pictures?
We believe we are able to identify about 50% of the bodies that are collected. These are Ukrainian citizens of our city and the surrounding towns. Some of them are being taken to the Kiev mortuaries, and this work is ongoing.
Mayor, you mentioned that there were elderly among the victims. Are there children?
Well, as I said, there are different kinds of people, and there are many children, many teenagers. These were children. They posed no threat to the Russian troops or Russia as a whole. They did pose absolutely no danger, and it was impossible not to see that they were children, not to see that a mother is carrying a child, and these cynical atrocities is what the Russian troops are all about. That's what Russia is all about. And we shall never forgive them. They will never be forgiven on this earth or in heaven.
Mayor, I can't imagine how people there are feeling. What are they telling you?
Almost everybody who survived the occupation, who went through the occupation, will need specialist psychological help to get out of the state. We Ukrainians have seen a lot through our history, but what we have seen through the period of the Russian war, which is still ongoing and it hasn't stopped yet, that we have experienced for the first time.
Mayor, how worried are you that Bucha is just the beginning, that we're going to be seeing this in other towns and cities?
So, based on what we have seen, what the Russian occupiers have done here, I think we can expect to see the same picture on the entire territory from Kiev to Mariupol and Kherson. This will happen everywhere where the Russian occupier has stepped in, and they cannot make progress militarily. The Ukrainian armed forces stopped them, so they are torturing civilians, and this is how they are performing. This is the so-called denazification that the Russian President Putin mentioned, but it's actually dehumanization of Ukrainians.
I think that is something that is so important to keep in mind here, as he's saying, essentially, Bucha is not special, that this is something that he expects to see in many, many towns. And we've heard the horror stories coming out of Mariupol, for instance, Berman, but it's something entirely different to see it, for reporters to be able to go there and to look into the mass graves rather than just hearing descriptions of them, to verify, obviously, that that is going on. There's no reason to doubt those descriptions coming out of Mariupol, but the pictures tell such an important story. They tell such an important truth about just how horrific this is, what we're seeing here.
It's so important to bear witness to the horror, to see for ourselves what took place. So when you had Frederick Pleiken standing on the edge of a mass grave, that is important historically. It is important for the world to see it and to figure out what the world is going to do about it. To that end, I want to bring in Alexei Arestovich. He's an advisor to President Zelensky's chief of staff. Alexei, thank you so much for being with us. Do you feel at this point that you have a sense of the scale of death, the scale of the atrocities committed here?
If we seen to Syria, Aleppo, to Chechnyas, and about Budapest and Hungary about 56, we completely understand and clearly understand that it's normal for Russian troops to make these terrible things in Afghanistan and like this. It's a line of the Russian military culture. It's very, very organically for them to do these things. We could remember Afghanistan. It's about 1 million people died in same situation, same way, and same orders of high commander, rank commander officers.
What we're seeing in Bucha right now, are you seeing it in other towns that the Ukrainians have reoccupied?
Main problem, and when we have to clearly understand, that is not exception in Bucha, Gostomel, or Irpin. Right now, we have reoccupied towns of Makarov and Borodyanka, and situation in there may be even worse than in Bucha. It's take to time to understand this and to identify this, but witness says it's a more terrible situation than in Bucha. We have to clear, of course, but it could be. If we look at Mariupol, after all will be ended, finished, I think it's 100 more worse situations than in Bucha. Bucha is not exception in this war.
That's terrifying. It really is. What do you want the world to do about it?
I think after that situation, after Bucha massacre, what could be, any countries could be neutralized. It's have to choose the side. It's Putin's regime side, or it's sides of the open society, sides of the whole organized world, which have to decide what we have to do with Putin regimes, because this regime, it's anti-humanity. Essentially anti-humanity regime. You understand? That's what things. It's not exception. It's not a excess of execution. It's essentially Russian Putin regime. The world have to understand this. They tried to make today UN Nation Security Council summit.
Yeah.
Russian regime, Putin regime proclaimed this is a Ukrainian show. It's not a real massacres.
Which is why.
So
it's
we
so
have to
important.
understand
Yeah.
that's a lot of lie and a lot of massacres is essentially Putin regime.
Which is why it's so important to have our reporters on the ground to see it for ourselves and show the world what's happening. I do want to ask you, Russia says it's redirecting its assets to the east here, and it's going to concentrate, it claims, now, its attacks on the eastern part of Ukraine. CNN has reporting, and the British are saying that Putin wants to be able to declare victory by May 9th. What do you say to this?
They redirect main operative efforts from north of the Ukraine to the east, as you say, and they have eight operation direction in Ukraine when he starts this company. But now it's left only two. It's Mariupol and try to surround our forces.
All right, we appear to have lost Alexei. Hang on.
A lot of. Do you see me?
Yes,
do you hear me?
please continue.
They can't to start operation for surrounded our forces at the east because it's have a lot of disorganization and losses in their own force. They try to take reserves from Russia. It's a 5 army from far east. It's a last army from 10 field armies they taken here in Ukraine, and. I think that Putin wants to meet President Zelensky with a little but victory. And this type of victory, he thinks it could be capture Mariupol or surrounded our forces at the east. But I think they can't do it at all.
Alexei Arestovich, please stay safe. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Ukraine says 11 of its mayors are being held captive by Russian forces. One has been killed in captivity. This is CNN's special live coverage. Stay with us.
Inside Africa, in association with Zenith Bank.
Sing it, I'm here.
In Abuja, Nigeria, twin sisters Oiza and Mei are recording their first set of studio singles.
Do it again.
While the two are hopeful to one day become full-time musicians, they continue to work their 9-to-5 jobs. But when the sun goes down and they clock out for the day, that's when their musical side comes out to play.
1, 2, 3, woo! And we have our sights on the Grammys. So that's like a huge, hi Grammys, that's like a huge thing for us. We really hope to be with the likes of Burna Boy and Wizkid and all the greats that have done it before us. We want to win a Grammy as well, just to make music. That's the most important thing.
unpredictable environment, and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy. And so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening.
There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the US forces in Syria going?
And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, tonight on CNN.
I'm Ben Wiedemann on the road to Kherson, Ukraine, and this is CNN.
I am Brianna Keeler, live in Western Ukraine. The mayor of Motyzhin, Ukraine, Olga Sukhenko, allegedly shot and killed by Russian forces along with her husband and her son for refusing to comply to their demands, with their demands. Ukrainian officials say that the Russian forces right now also currently holding nearly a dozen other mayors captive. CNN reporters are covering the latest.
I'm Nada Bashir in London, and according to Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister, 11 local Ukrainian mayors from the regions of Kiev, Kherson, Mykolaiv and Donetsk have been held captive by Russian forces. In a statement on Sunday, Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister said that Olga Sukhenko, a local mayor from the Kiev region, had been killed in captivity. CNN has been unable to independently verify these claims, although Russian forces have detained local government officials in a number of instances around the country. The Ukrainian government has repeatedly accused Russian forces of committing war crimes and has said that those responsible will be held accountable in line with international humanitarian law.
Christopher White, Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Reporter, coming to you from Rome. Pope Francis has confirmed that a potential papal visit to Kyiv is on the table. Since the outbreak of the war, the Pope has promised to do anything he can to bring an end to it, and now that includes a possible papal visit into the war-torn country. The Pope has spoken with President Zelensky twice, who has made appeals to the Pope saying his physical presence could be the only potential way that peace is brought to the country. The Pope has a number of limiting factors, including his knee problems, but he did confirm on Sunday that it is under consideration and very much a possibility.
Hundreds of Ukrainians fleeing the war in Ukraine are arriving to the Mexican border city of Tijuana to try to seek asylum in the United States. Volunteers on the ground tell CNN that in the last few days, the number of arrivals has quadrupled. Now, this is happening against the backdrop of the U.S. Committing to accept up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. Now, that is going to include a full range of legal pathways like the refugee admissions program, parole, or visas. But the administration has not yet released all details of those plans. And in the interim, some Ukrainians are seeing arriving to the U.S.-Mexico border as the fastest way to get into the United States.
We do have some more on our breaking news. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accusing the Russian government of genocide, accusing Russian forces of genocide. CNN is on the ground at the site of some of these atrocities that he's pointing to as evidence of that genocide. Plus, Foreign fighters have joined the war in Ukraine, why some officials say they're treating it like a video game and that it could actually be causing even more harm.
We'll be landing shortly in South Africa.
Sunny day in Cape Town and today.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
We live in such a fast-paced world where the news has been so relentless. Historic events have happened one after the other. I think that you need that daily appointment with viewers around the world to try and sort through the news of the day. What's important? Why does it matter to me? How do I put it all in context? We follow the news as it happens and where it happens. And then we also take a step back to walk the viewer through the day's news. That is the mission of Hala Garani tonight.
The world's biggest business stories in one place. Expert analysis from every corner of the globe. Marketplace, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East. With CNNBusiness.com.
Once in a generation opportunity.
Technology, innovation, business.
I'm Vedika Sood in New Delhi, and this is CNN.
Amid new evidence of mass atrocities in Ukraine, many foreign fighters have tried to join Ukrainians on the front lines. CNN Plus anchor Sarah Seidner spoke with one former U.S. Army official about the role they could play and the risks that these people could present.
I've just been told by a former special operator, a U.S. Special Forces soldier who's there and is very experienced around the world, and he's telling me that it's a very mixed bag. There are some He said highly skilled people coming in, but then there's also people coming in who have no idea what they're doing, and they literally think it's like a video game, and they don't understand the danger they're getting into, and the consequences on the battlefield are kind of playing out the way that you might expect with that kind of combination of experience and inexperience. They also don't have equipment. They don't have weapons. He said there's like one weapon for 20 guys. The Ukrainians don't have enough stuff to give them, and so that they're just kind of putting them on the front, and there's lots of chaos. They think that what they see in these video games is war. They think they understand, but they are so far from what the actual reality of ground combat is. It's deeply troubling and potentially fatal to some of these guys when they get there and find out. And he said a lot of them, as soon as there's a few bombs falling around, they're leaving.
And joining me now is Sarah Seidner, anchor of Big Picture with Sarah Seidner on CNN+. What an interesting discussion. It's not that anyone doubts the motivation of people going to help. It's just the effectiveness of everyone.
That's right. And I myself and my crew, when we were in Przemysl, which is the train station that's about 20 minutes away from one of the largest borders with Poland from Ukraine, and we noticed these gentlemen sort of walking together, kind of in a stack, sort of a military stack. They had on military gear, they had a backpack, and I heard them speaking, and it was English. And I thought, I wonder what they're doing here. And so I started asking them, and it turned out many of them were former military, from the United States, and they all had planned to go into Ukraine. The problem was they didn't know who was going to pick them up when they got to the Ukrainian side. They didn't have some of them didn't even have a jacket it was frigid. It was 0 and below. And I was very concerned when I said, well, what is your plan? And they said, well, we haven't quite figured that out. And also, can you tell us how to get to the border? And I thought, my motherly thing came out. I was like, have you guys really thought this through? I think the numbers in the beginning, we heard from Zelensky. He said about 16,000 people were on their way or had made it into Ukraine to fight, foreign fighters. There's a foreign legion. There is a whole process where you had to sign up. And so we did see these gentlemen, a couple of them, a couple of days later, they had not made it in because there is a process. But there is a real concern that you have some who are trained, you have some who are completely not trained, who do go into this scenario not knowing just how incredibly dangerous this is. And I think the U.S.'s stance has long been, do not travel to Ukraine. And they are talking about everyone from civilians to those who may want to fight because it's just too volatile. And if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have an army behind you, remember, but the heart of these people is very clear. All they want to do is help because they feel like an injustice is being perpetrated on the Ukrainian people.
Look, this is a real war and there are real risks.
Yeah.
There's plenty of humanitarian work to do if they can't find a military avenue. Sarah Seidner, what an interesting perspective. Thank you very much. And you can catch Sarah Seidner every weekday beginning at 9 a.m. only on CNN+. Of course, you can stream it anytime. Brianna?
We've been able to reestablish our communications with Christian Amanpour, who is live in Kharkiv. And Christian, we have been having a little bit of trouble with our signal. I just want to warn our viewers, but I'm hoping that this is going to be the time where we can get you to set the scene for us there in Kharkiv.
So, Brianna, we came out of the shelter where I was trying to report from, about half an hour ago with you, where we'd seen so many people still 40 days into this war sheltering. The reason is because of this kind of damage. And there's been this kind of damage all over central Kharkiv for the last 40 days. And it's literally almost like a ghost town. Now, this is the second biggest city. We're just panning the camera around to show you. These are main roads in the center of this city. And everything that we can see is boarded up. You might be able to hear a little in the distance. We've been hearing the crump of incoming and some outgoing artillery, literally ever since we've been here. We're not exactly sure what the destination is. We saw a little bit of evidence this morning in a residential neighborhood of a mortar shell that hit last night. And according to the authorities here, just in that neighborhood, there was something like 34 casualties and 7 deaths. That's just in one Sunday afternoon in one residential neighborhood. So people in the second city of Ukraine, are really concerned about what their fate might be as the Russians redeploy and move from Kyiv. B, they certainly don't want to be victims to what we're seeing unfold in the areas of Russian occupation around Kiev now that they are retreating from there and the full horrors are being demonstrated. So here, about a third of the population has fled, according to local authorities. There is practically no business that we can see here at all, maybe some gas stations, but unlike Kyiv, it hasn't even come back to normal in small areas. There aren't restaurants or cafes that we've been able to see in the last 36 hours. We have been to several of these underground subway stations where lots and lots of people remain, and they've turned them almost into neighborhoods, almost into semi-permanent homes underground, because people say that is the only safe area, including children. They say that's only where they feel safe. So today we saw a civil defense team going around various metro stations, teaching even children about what to recognize, what different ordnance looks like, what not to touch if they happen to be outside and see something lying on the ground. They were even showing how to deal with a chemical attack. Imagine that, children being shown masks and how to deal, you know, with a chemical attack and basic first aid. It's pretty dramatic when you see it in that very close and personal way, Brianna.
Yeah, and certainly, if anyone knows, you do, Christian, the long-term dangers to children when you're talking about so much unexploded ordnance and even mines potentially that have been placed. We've heard that from the mayor of Bucha. I do wonder, Christian, when I spoke with the mayor earlier, he said that he expected what is happening in his city to be the story in places, whether it's Kherson or even Kharkiv. Are people there that you're talking to worried that as they're able to see areas that you know, Russian forces have been in, that they may see the same thing there?
Well, they are, which is one of the reasons why they still are taking shelter. They don't want to be victims to anything, whether it's long-range artillery or close-up killings, basically, which is what we saw around the Kyiv area. But the thing is, they haven't captured this city at all. They have had some of the villages in the outskirts. And remember, we're about, I think, 40 kilometers or so from the Russian border. So just north is the Russian border. And then east is where the Russians say they are redirecting their combat operations, i.e. the Donbass area. So this could, and that's why people are afraid here, turn into a much hotter combat zone. It was a while ago. It's calmed down slightly here, but as I say, still, it's shut down. I mean, this city is not operating really, as you would imagine, a major city, the second city in Ukraine. So yes, they're worried, and all of those places we're bound to see, as Russian forces get pushed back, we're bound to see, you know, the full extent, the full scale of what transpired once we can get into some of these other places.
Yeah, it's just such an empty street there in the middle of what should be a bustling city in the middle of the day. Christian, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate that live report for us from Kharkiv. There is some new intelligence suggesting that Russia is shifting focus to the east, as Christian was just talking about, and may even declare victory by early May. What a, quote, Russian victory could look like. Plus, back in the United States, a mob hitman on the run after fleeing federal custody, and it wasn't his first escape. Details on this urgent manhunt.
The Dangote Group stands at the forefront of African enterprise. Since 1978, we've touched the lives of millions of people by meeting their basic needs. Our belief in the promise of Africa has taken us into 14 African countries, with substantial investments that will propel the continent towards greater prosperity, promising jobs, improved standards of living, and economic growth. Dangote, for an empowered Africa.
I'm Matt Rivers in Ciudad Acuña along the U.S.-Mexico border. This is CNN.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
The region's post-pandemic, or mid-pandemic, I should say, performance is, as you go across the 20 or so countries that make up the Middle East and North Africa, is as diverse as the 500 million people or so that live in it. We've been saying for a long time that the only way we can address, as a sort of silver bullet, the youth unemployment crisis and socioeconomic problems that we have and challenges we have across the region is by nurturing small businesses to create jobs, create opportunities, and pursue innovation. The problem is no one was investing in small businesses, but I see that changing. We need to create businesses as change agents who can in turn create the solutions both on a social and economic objective. One of the other trends we're seeing is where businesses are aligning with their social and environmental impact in addition to their, of course, financial impact as being one and the same in terms of stakeholder returns. So that, I think, is a positive trend we have to nurture.
Try to be global and we try to be smart. But I want to hear our authentic voices of people who are passionate or intelligent, and that's the consistency that we try to get at.
Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Sunday on CNN.
A new U.S. intelligence assessment shows Vladimir Putin is revising his strategy in Ukraine to focus on trying to take control of Donbass and other regions in eastern Ukraine, with a target date of May 9th. That is when Russia celebrates Victory Day, as it's called, which marks the day that the Nazis surrendered in World War II and is celebrated with parades of troops and weaponry across Red Square in front of the Kremlin. Joining us now to talk a little bit more about this is CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Cedric, tell us about what appears to be this shift.
So, Brianna, good morning. The basic shift is this. Originally, the Russians were involved right in this area, right around Kyiv. Well, what they're doing now is they're moving their forces and their efforts into this region right here. So this is the Donbass region. This is exactly where the Russians are going to be concentrating a lot of their efforts. Secondary efforts, at least at the moment, secondary efforts will be right around here in the southern area. So let's move into the area around the south here, just real briefly. This area right here is Kherson. That has been the scene of fighting before. Mykolaiv, where we've had Ben Weedham in there, that is an area that has also seen a lot of fighting. Ukrainian presence right here. The goal is Odessa. But when you go into the Donbass region in the east, this is what we're looking at right here. This is the area that the Russians control at the moment through their separatist forces. What they want is this area right here, and to link up here with the land bridge around Mariupol, and that is what they're looking at. That is the big shift that they're doing right now. And Brianna, what that means is You can see a lot of fighting here. This is where a lot of this action is going to be, and what we expect then is for them to go where Christian is in Kharkiv, and potentially, if they're successful here, move to Dnipro, which is a major junction where they could unite some of their forces, and that would be a big issue for them.
You know, it was interesting, Cedric. I was talking to someone who is a journalist for an independent news and media website earlier in the show, and he had come into Lviv from Kyiv, and his friends are now telling him, come back, it's safe, you should come back. And yet he's very concerned that you could have Russian troops regrouping around Kyiv. What are the chances that this is just Russia letting off the gas in that area for a little while?
Well, the chances are actually pretty high that that's the case. What we have to look at is what are they going to do with the forces that are up in this area and over here to the east? So if they do a regrouping and they move back in from this part of Russia and this part of Belarus, then what that could do is that could affect what the Ukrainians have been able to achieve at the moment. What you see here is actually quite interesting, because what the Ukrainians have done is they have actually moved their forces into areas where they've pushed the Russians further back, even in Chernihiv right here. And then you also have, of course, this area, including the nuclear plant at Chernobyl. All of this, we have a lot of Ukrainian presence right in here, moving the Russians back to Belarus, which is right up here. Bucha, of course, Bucha is the scene right here of the atrocities that we have been reporting on, and that, of course, will, I think, change a lot of what we see in this area. But I would be very wary about making Kyiv as a safe area at the moment.
All right, Cedric, thank you so much for that. And Berman, I think you're probably hearing at the air raid sirens going off here in Lviv. As you're well aware, Berman, these go off from time to time. They're actually in reaction to quite a large area, so it doesn't necessarily mean that something is impending here in the immediate area. But obviously, we're keeping an eye out just to be safe, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. It means it's time to be wary, look around, be careful. Back to you in just a moment, Brianna. But first, here in the United States this morning, a manhunt underway for a notorious New York mobster. Dominic Taddeo was convicted of murdering 3 people and attempting to kill 2 others. He's now gone missing. Less than a year before he was set to be released, CNN's Jean Casares joins us now. What gives?
Well, this is a lifelong criminal, someone who's very, very dangerous. And federal, local, state authorities, they are all on the lookout for him now. He was in Orlando. That's where he escaped from. But he could be anywhere in this country.
Wanted once again.
He's highly dangerous right now.
Mobster Dominic Taddeo is on the run after escaping federal custody last week, less than a year before he was set to be released upon completing his sentence.
But now, I mean, if he gets caught and he gets convicted of escape, he probably will never get out.
Taddeo, now 64 years old, was serving time in a residential halfway house near Orlando, Florida. He was transferred there in February from a medium security prison. On March 28th, Taddeo failed to return from an authorized appointment, according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
This guy was very violent individual.
Taddeo, originally from the Rochester, New York area, was serving several sentences for a string of convictions, including racketeering and illegal weapons charges. In 1992, he pleaded guilty to killing 3 people and attempting to kill 2 others. He admitted in court that a crime organization known as La Cosa Nostra, another name for the mafia, paid him for the killings.
Dominic Taddeo supposedly got $500 for each one of the killings he's convicted of.
Taddeo filed a request for compassionate release in December 2020, citing concerns over the COVID-19 pandemic. That request was denied due to what the judges said was the seriousness of the offenses and his extremely lengthy criminal record. And this latest escape wasn't Taddeo's first.
He was released on $25,000 bail back in 1987, and he jumped bail, and he was gone for 2 years.
According to the Democrat and Chronicle newspaper, Taddeo disappeared while out on bail on federal weapons charges. He was arrested 2 years later in Cleveland, Ohio, after authorities tapped a payphone in Rochester where he was known to call local associates, according to the paper. Today, Tadeo remains a fugitive. The U.S. Marshal Service telling CNN several state and local agencies are involved in the nationwide manhunt.
So this is a convicted triple murderer that was just about to get